What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
You are watching us on Iconic, or you are listening wherever podcasts are served. We certainly do appreciate it. We couldn't do this show without the support of our sponsors. Delete Me is one of them. The tech giants are making a fortune selling your personal information online. They don't care. Totally, but this. Removes your personal information like your address, your age, phone number, all of these things from the internet and from leading data brokers. And by removing that personal information from data brokers, it also takes it off of Google. Now, this company has been featured in Wall Street Journal, CNBC, CNET, New York Times, and NPR. They've removed over 20 million personal listings from people. They are the most trusted name and proven privacy solution out there. So check them out by clicking the link in the description box below. We're also sponsored by Fiverr. If you want to outsource some of your work or just need specialized help with a project that you're working on, you need to check out Fiverr. They have a network of thousands of freelance experts in business, design, programming, tech, digital marketing, music and audio, you name it. There's somebody on there that can do it and do it better than you and probably cheaper than you. So if you need someone to help build out your website, please take a look on them. Click the link in the description box and put this army of freelancers to work for you. And lastly, we are brought to you by Cash Advance, and it is a crazy time we're living through. There's so much uncertainty there. Jobs going away, life savings going away. If you are in a financial emergency and you feel like you have no other options left, please take a look, check out Cash Advance. They'll give you an answer right away. You can submit your request online through their secured site, and they'll let you know what programs they have available for you. Hopefully, you don't need this situation, you don't need this service, but in the event that you do, it's there and available for you. The links for all 3 of these sponsors are in the description box below, and that helps to support the show. And the show that we're doing today is going to be crazy because, you know, I've had Sean Atwood on my show. I've been on his show a half a dozen times. But if you go to Sean Atwood's YouTube page, one of the things you'll discover at the top is a pinned video that says what to do if a shot caller puts a hit on you. And it's got 5.5 million views. And I didn't know this, but apparently the answer to this question is you ring up your buddy Jamie Morgan Kane and let him go sort the person out, because he'll get to the bottom of this. So I am very happy to have Jamie Morgan Kane on the show to explain to us a little bit of background on his life and his struggles, what he went through, the way he sees the prison system, the reforms that we can make that, let's be honest, need to be made, and how we can turn this system around so that it is not just warehousing human beings, but it's actually providing a service and cranking out people that are better going out than they were coming in. So Jamie, thanks so much for agreeing to do this. I find your story to be troubling and horrifying and fascinating, and I'm so glad you came out the other end. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me on, and I'm actually doing pretty well now. I've been out almost 2.5 years, and I'm over here in the UK, and it's been a big adjustment, both getting out and then resettling back into the country where I was from. But I'm doing all right.
You're a good dude. You're a dude that was unfairly convicted, right? This is not an example of somebody that went off the rails and was a shithead in their younger years and just wound up in prison and turned their life around. This is a little bit different from that, right?
Well, yeah, it's different. And in a big part of the things that got everything kind of snowballing was because of the people behind the scene in my life on the outside, that quite honestly, I wasn't really, even though I'd been around them, I wasn't aware who they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we can relate to that at some point in our lives, having someone around us that maybe didn't have the best of intentions. So take us back to that moment. What led you into a situation where you took the fall for somebody close to you?
Well, I kind of have to go back just a little bit further than that.
Go back as far as you need to.
Okay. Well, like I said, I was born here in the UK, and then I got, when I was 6 months old, got taken to Canada. Year old, I got illegally taken to the US. And I was raised by a woman who was the woman who had been entrusted to take me to Canada up until I was 14. And she had worked for well-to-do families, both in domestic worker, like a maid, and also hosting at parties, because she'd actually been trained in what they call the silver service over here, which was kind of, if you ever watching anything like Downton Abbey or those kind of things, it's they have to have skills to be trained for this. So she raised me, and I thought she was my mom, but she got real ill. And one of the families she worked for was Dr. Charles Wetmore and his wife. And I had never met them previous, but anyway, it ended up, what I've come to find out, he had adopted a boy and a girl. He was a college professor. He was getting ready to move from Arizona to California. And the boy he had, who was 12, suddenly got ill and had to go away. And he made a deal with her that he would give her some money for her medical care, because in the United States, you don't have the National Health Service, as you know, which we over here. So everything costs. I mean, you just don't get really free medical care, even free clinics. It's not always that free. But so she had told me she would be back for me. And she always, whenever she told me that, she always did come back. But he had told her we were going to Texas. We ended up going to California, so she wouldn't even know where I was. And when I went to him, he said, "I'm adopting you. And now this will be your name, and this will be your new birth date, and this will be your social security number." And he gave me that other child's identity. Ooh. And I was rather small for my age because of poor nutrition growing up, So I was basically the size of a 12-year-old, to the point where I was given a whole closet full of clothes that had evidently belonged to the other child. Wow. So, but Dr. Wetmore, what makes him so important to this whole story is one of his best friends was a guy by the name of Richard Milhouse Nixon. Interesting. And we had a number of people who used to come to the house to pick him up, because he used to go to San Clemente to see, President Nixon. But one of the people that used to come to pick him up was a guy by the name of G. Gordon Liddy.
Oh, Jesus.
So, and then I have found out since was that Wetmore I knew he'd been in the Army Air Corps. He'd been a navigator bombardier in a B-17 over here during World War II, but he didn't do enough missions to actually rotate out like they talk about how many missions. He only did a very short period of time, and then he ended up going to work down in Brazil with something that at that time was called the OSS as an analyst. And we've actually found the paperwork showing him being on ships with known Nazi scientists going to Canada, going to America, and going to Brazil. He spent more than 2 years in Brazil and spoke Portuguese fluently, but he was an analyst for the OSS. And of course, if you know what the OSS was, you know it's the precursor to the CIA. Yeah. See, now I had no knowledge of any of this. He was from Rochester, New York, and through a lot of research done by other people, checking my story out and trying to fit pieces together, found out that he was friends with General Stokoff and other people who were involved with MK Ultra, who were involved in the ICBM missile stuff, so it goes much, much deeper. To me, he was just a guy I didn't like, who was supposed to be like a stepfather, and him and I argued all the time.
Right.
And so I cared very little about what he did. All I knew is he made my life a bit more miserable. So I just aggravated him any way I could. It was, and so the whole point was that in 1978, I was going through my first divorce, and I had a son, and he didn't like the fact of what I named my son, which was John Henry. And I did that kind of at the insistence of my wife at the time, because his name was Charles Henry, and I was under the name of John Raymond at the time. And she said, I said, I don't want to name him after him. She goes, well, why don't you play around, and why don't you come up with a name that puts both of you guys involved? That way, it's kind of, like in a way you're trying to make amends to him.
Right.
And so him and John Henry, well, of course, the first thing he did when he came down and found out we'd named the child is his thing was that he pointed out that I'd given the child a word that belonged to under the N word, because Negroes were John Henry. That's how he saw it. And because the American folk hero, because my son was born in 1976, I did his American folk hero, John Henry, steel driving man, blah, blah, blah. And right. The boy was big. The boy was 22 inches long and had to be cesarean section because his shoulders were so big and stuff. Never even thinking about that John Henry was black. That never came into my thought. But to Wetmore, it did. He didn't use the word Negro. He went a little bit worse. But in a statement he made later, he did say that word that way. But anyway, funny enough is that my wife at the time had cheated on me a number of times. And I was so adamant to try to keep my family together that I basically would forgive her, and we'd try to work through things, And the argument was every time I'd catch her and I tended to rough up the guys she was with, she'd always yell at me, "You never like my friends." And I'd always tell her, well, I don't mind your friends. I just don't like your friends I find you in bed with. Those are the friends I don't like.
Reasonable.
So anyway, she up and abandoned me and my son when my son was about 9 months old. Left me a note saying, "I'm tired of being a wife. I'm tired of being a mother. You wanted him. He's your son. You raised him. I'm going home to my mom." So she moved back. We were in San Diego. She moved back to San Jose. Well, I raised my son for almost a year by myself, and it was great. And I ran a little small motorcycle shop at the time, and I'd take him down there, and he'd get, treated by the people that came in. They all, "Hey, kids here, hey," But then there came a point where all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, she files for divorce and wants to take custody of my son. Well, I'm in San Diego. I suddenly get a special delivery messenger drive up to my house and give me a letter from Dr. Wetmore, who was in Fresno at the time, saying, "Come see me immediately." Okay. Now, he and I had not been on best of terms. So anyway, I made arrangements to have somebody watch my son, and I rode up there on my bike with a couple of my biker buddies. And we got up there, and he was living in a very nice house that he'd built, and stuff. And he tells me, it's real simple. He goes, here's the deal. I have the contacts in the judicial system to where I can protect your son and keep him from being taken by his mom's family. I've got that kind of juice. You don't have that. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to sign your parental rights to me. I'll raise your son. I will change his name from John Henry to Lincoln Alban. So it'll be Lincoln Alban Wetmore. His last initials will spell law, and I will, have him schooled in the proper way and become an attorney. Okay. And and I don't know what came over me, but anyway, the moment he said that, I just kind of started laughing at him and told him, absolutely not. Considering how you treated me, I'm not going to give you him to. And he was very adamant. He wanted my son really, really. I mean, it was more so than anything. And like I said, he was never really a father figure in my life. So all of a sudden he goes, you wait right there. And he runs back into his house. And my buddies are on the lawn. He said, he's going to go get a gun. You know that. He's going to come back out with a gun. And so we're standing out there. And he comes out and he throws me an envelope. And he tells me, get off my property. Get out of my life. You're not my son. You're not even an American citizen.
Whoa.
And slams the door. So we get on our motorcycles and we take off. We go down the road. And we end up going to a little diner, and we're sitting in there, and they're like, what the hell was all that? And I said, I don't know, the guy's crazy or what. So I opened up this thing, this envelope, and what I find is there's a passport that has the face of the woman who I thought was my mom in it, and it has my real mother's birth name, which is what the woman had been using. And so I've got this passport, and then I have a baptism certificate of my baptism back on the Isle of Man.
Okay.
And so now I actually have tangible proof I'm from there. I'm from the UK. I've got proof now. Well, I end up having to go to the court in San Jose to fight for my son. And I go there, and my wife is sitting there with her parents, her two older brothers that were both were firefighters. One was a battalion chief, one was a captain, their family, and 4 attorneys.
Ooh.
I'm sitting there by myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because the last thing she told me is, we'll make this amicable. We won't bring in any legal counsel. It'll just be between you and me.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so it go. And so when we go in this, and I present the whole fact that she abandoned my son and all this stuff, and I'd raised my son, and because of the way she had abandoned, I actually had CPS involved in my son's life. And they wrote a great report saying what a great dad I was, and all this kind of stuff. And the judge looks at me and says, I'm sorry, even as her being a horrible mother, even though she abandoned her child, she's got so much family support that the child has a much better chance of a good upbringing than what you can give him. Mm-hmm. And so he took my son. And at that point, it was like a little hand reached in my chest and ripped out my heart. That was really probably one of the worst moments of my life at that time that I could remember. But what we've come to find out later was that 2 of those attorneys were actually hired by Wetmore.
Oh.
And then the thing was that when all this thing came about, and I had tried to the oldest boy, I hadn't seen him since he got taken from me. But one time, I saw him one time after he got taken, because I had visitation, but his mom would always hide him when I'd come up for visitation. So one time I got to see him, and then I didn't see him again. And so I didn't have any contact with him again until like 1999. And so we're talking about, this is like 79, 99. So like over almost 20 years that I don't have any contact with him. And it comes out with that, he came to see me when I was at Solano State Prison.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing he says to me, tell me everything that my mom did. Tell me everything, every dirty deed she ever did. Tell me all this.
Wow.
And probably at that time, I probably should have told him things but what I gave him the answer was, the issues your mother and I have were between your mother and I. I do not want you to hold a grudge against her for anything. She goes, well, she's told me all these horrible things about you. I said, well, I can't tell you how she's going to be. I can only tell you how I am. And I just don't feel that that's something you tell the children.
Right.
Well, partly because of that, he assumed that everything she said about me was right and that she had never done anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing was, when she had told him that, no, I was a U.S. citizen. I didn't have anything to do with the UK and stuff. So when I did finally get notified by Immigration and Customs Enforcement in 2008, they told me, you're not a U.S. citizen. We've got an order for removal from you as soon as the CDC California Department of Corrections gives you to us. I notified him, and he immediately went into this, you're a liar, you're a fat mouth, that's not true. Mom says it's not true, blah, blah, blah. And then, all these things. And then he said he wouldn't have nothing to do with me. So I wrote him one last letter. I told him, look, if you're not in my life before I leave the States, don't expect to be in my life after. Because, you have this time to do it. And that's like, say, 2008. Now, I don't get out until 2018. Have no contact with him that whole time. I get back to the UK, and where I'm staying, I help take care of an 82-year-old lady who had been the pen pal I had from prisoners abroad for 12 years.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And Prisoners Abroad, like I says, an organization helps you repatriate when you come back.
Yeah.
And she'd been my pen pal for like 12 years. And her thing was, she didn't want me coming back and going into a hostel, and that type of thing. So she offered me a place to stay, and I became a boarder through getting, I get like a rent credit from the council. And so she gets that. So I pay my rent and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But I helped take care of her as well because of all the support she gave me during the 12 years. But she says, well, you ought to give your son another chance, So we send him a message because she actually had his email from having tried to contact him over the years, and he just kind of wasn't doing it. So we send a message. First message I get back is, how dare you do that? How dare you leave the United States? Do you not know that I have booked a hotel to come out and visit you, and I've got a car rented, and I was coming out in just a couple of months to come to see you? How dare you just up and leave the United States?
Were you deported?
Yes. I went from dual vocational institution, Tracy, California, 6 a.m. in the morning. I was released into the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, went straight to a detention center, sat there for another 2 months, and then was taken by 2 ICE agents and an air marshal, put on a flight, took 17 hours because we had layover in Georgia, and I was waist chained and handcuffed all my flight back until we got to Heathrow Airport. And the pilot told him, you better not let the British authorities see one of their citizens in all the shackles. They won't take it kindly. So no, I was deported and given a lifetime, you can't come back to the U.S.
Yeah.
But interesting enough, when they deported me, they normally, on your deportation papers, they do list why you're being deported. Nowhere on my deportation papers does it talk about the crime. It says you came into our country illegally, you stayed in our country illegally, and you violated our immigration laws.
Right. You were tied up at the time.
But the whole thing was, normally people who get deported for just illegally entering the country do not get life restricted.
Yeah.
So, and I can guarantee you, if you ask Sean, his said because of his crime and what he was in prison. I guarantee you that was on his deportation papers. So I had asked him when I first got the deportation papers, I said, why isn't this on there? And I had this immigration officer named Gregorio, and he says, well, I'm going to tell you right now, our federal attorneys at the Department of Justice has looked at your situation, and it stinks. And if by chance you ever bring a wrongful conviction or judicial case against anybody, the U.S. government will not be one of the defendants.
Wow.
So they were going, not us. We just deport. So that right there threw up all kinds of red flags to people about, wait a minute, something's not quite right here. But then after I did the interview with Sean, the boys sent me some crazy emails and stuff. And he said that I could not, his mom had verified I could not be British of any kind because he did DNA and he's not doesn't have British blood. Or if he does, it's like super, super minimal. Mm-hmm. I'm 92% British. Yeah. And the other bit is Scandinavian. And since my dad's side of the family comes from Dublin, and guess who helped settle Dublin? The Vikings. Right. So the thing was, that's where my Western Finnish and Scandinavian blood comes from, my Dublin side. But the rest of it's here in Britain, with like 50% of my bloodline coming from Lincolnshire up here, and stuff. So we did this DNA. My friend, she did it as a Christmas present a year ago for me. And what we come to find out is I actually have no Anglo-Saxon blood. I have no Roman blood, but I have ancestral DNA that denotes back to the original Britons that were here before Rome.
Whoa.
So I couldn't be too much more British than that.
Yeah.
The thing was, what it has come out to be, basically from almost like checking cards off of different things, is that looking at photographs of my son, he's much taller than I am. I'm only 5 foot. Well, I'm 5'5" now. I used to be 5'6.5", but that comes with age. But he's almost 5'10", 10.5", and he's a dead-on ringer to Dr. Wetmore.
Really?
So yeah. So the thing is that what most of the people who've done the investigations have looked at is because I had a second son, and Dr. Wetmore had no actual interest in my second son. He didn't care to hear his name, didn't want to meet him, but he wanted the oldest boy. And so it's kind of the idea that it's all likelihood that, because he said in a statement he knew my wife was having affairs. I didn't know him until I came across them. Right. I never told him. So the object that people say is the most likely reason he would know is that he was one of them. Mm-hmm. And it was during that time period that would have been the right time for her to get pregnant with the boy. And like I said, if you look at the pictures of him as he's aged, he's looked more and more like Dr. Wetmore.
Yeah.
And so that's come down to that. And so anyway, the thing was that when I had these documents from Dr. Wetmore and I got with my second wife, my wife, like I said, from the time my divorce happened, things were getting kind of in turmoil. I finally came to a point where I decided I was going to get a passport and come back over here and try to see if I could find any of my family that lived here. Well, my second wife had dropped that lug to Dr. Wetmore, and he said in his own statement that he was actually paying my wife and paying the girl I thought was my half sister, and also paying the person who became the victim, who was her dad's brother, her uncle and stuff, to give him information about things I was doing. And he said, it's amazing how a little bit of cash will get people to betray, people.
Yeah.
And so she told him I was going to do it. Well, the first thing he realized is if I apply for a passport, and I'd gone back I took my name back, Morgan James Kane, because I'd grown up with Morgan James Kane. So I'd taken that back. And I was changing over my driver's license and stuff. But because I didn't go into court and do it in one big swoop, I did it by what they called usage in California. The social security number that belonged to the other kid got converted to my name. And but I was going to get a passport. Well, when he realized that if I applied for a passport, questions might be asked when people go, how'd you get over here? Where have you been? Why'd you have this other name? And of course, then things would start unraveling for him. So what ended up happening is I came home one night and there was a dead man on my living room floor, and it happened to be the guy that was the uncle of the girl I thought and he had just been put in jail just 2 weeks earlier for beating her up and choking her son. And suddenly he's out and he's at my house and he's dead on my floor. My wife's not there. My youngest son's not there. And the thing was that because I had been a corpsman in the Navy, I know dead. I checked him out. He was dead. He was cold. And the DA used to always say, well, how do you know he was dead? You're not a doctor. And I said, well, because I've been around dead people and I know what dead is. But anyway, because of what he had done to the girl and her son, I had told my wife, don't have anything to do with him. Again, it's one of those things where my wife was choosing to play things behind my back. I did not know she'd been going down to the jail to visit the guy. I didn't know that when he came out that she invited him over to the house and stuff. Well, all I could think of was I couldn't have him found there at the house because he and I had physical altercations on a couple of different occasions. I didn't want my family involved. I didn't think my wife knew anything about this. I didn't know how he got in the house, but I thought this, because there was no wounds on him, my first thought was he might have had a heart attack. So my thought was, I'm going to get him away from here. Now, I found out that if you paroled and you were not able to go back to a house that you were previous at, they would parole you to the rescue mission from the jail, bail you out to the rescue missions. So I was going to take him back down and put him by the rescue mission, figure they'd find him, and now it's not my problem.
Right.
Big mistake. But anyway, I still did. I put him in the sleeping bag, was putting him in the back of the truck. My wife drives up. And my wife comes running over and she goes, he came over, ate dinner, and died.
Right. Okay.
And then I took off with our son, took him over to a friend's house. I was hoping you'd come home so you could fix this, because that's kind of how she saw me, and most people, is I'm the guy who fixes things.
Right.
And so I get in the truck, she gets in the truck, and we spend, and this at this time, it's like almost 1 o'clock in the morning. We spend the next 4 hours driving around while she's screaming at me, wanting to know what I'm going to do. And then, like, why didn't you bring a shovel? Being the fact I didn't kill the guy, being the fact I had no, pre-knowledge. I was a little out of my sorts on this. So anyway, as dawn was starting, and I realized that I couldn't be driving around with a dead man in my back of my truck, I stopped on the side of the road. I propped him up on there's vineyards in California. I propped him up against a post in the sleeping bag. And then I probably did the stupidest thing that I could do compared to everything else I've already just told you was stupid. I pulled out his wallet. I wrote my name and number and I said, in case of emergency, call. And I did that because I didn't want to take a chance he wouldn't be identified. And I didn't want to take a chance he wouldn't get a proper burial.
Right.
Put that back in his pocket, put it back in his wallet back in his pocket, and we drove off. And it was actually later that day, they contacted the girl that was his niece, and she She said, oh, I thought he was still in jail, blah, 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 blah. So then they contact me and they said, when was the last time you saw him, alive? And I went, 2 weeks ago, which was true. I hadn't seen him.
Right.
So I wasn't lying to them specifically, but, I kind of knew that they would prefer me to say, oh, well, I just found him last night.
Right.
Well, I don't know anything else going on at the time. They initially came back with the coroner's report saying he'd been strangled.
Okay.
And which really threw me for a loop. My wife was rather stocky, but I couldn't see that she could strangle him. I just didn't seem that.
Mm-hmm.
But then what ended up happening was roughly within 3 or 4 days after he was dead, my wife and the girl, they go out and they start cashing checks on his bank account, because one of the things he'd done is he'd taken her welfare money. She was trying to get her welfare money back. So she was forging checks, and that actually came out in the report that the checks were made out to her and it was signed off by her. And then she'd forged his name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so it gets all round up into this thing. Then suddenly she becomes the state witness against my wife when she suddenly drops the bombshell that my wife had used cyanide to kill the guy with.
Oh.
Right. Well, then they find out that in the police report, he had purchased the cyanide. But nobody ever found the cyanide. All they had was a receipt from where he'd bought it. And they don't have it anywhere else. And the thing was, it turned out that the girl had given my wife the guy's asthma tablets to take to him at the county jail. And my wife actually had taken these down to give him in the county jail. Now, that kind of shows you how stupid people are, because sheriffs do not let you just come up and give medication to somebody in the county jail. Here's some pills. They're for a headache.
Right.
It doesn't happen, but they tried. Well, it turned out that apparently the cyanide was in the capsules.
Oh.
So after he'd eaten, she gave him his capsules. He took one, and that's what killed him. But of course, the capsules all disappear. And when they asked my wife, she said, oh, well, being that he was dead, I didn't think he'd need him anymore. And I didn't want him left around for my son to find, so I threw him away. Not something that was disclosed at the beginning, just something that kind of showed up later. Now, the whole time I'm sitting in jail just as initially as an accessory to things. But they decided to run my wife's trial for murder 1, 2 counts of special circumstances, meant 2 chances to get the death penalty.
Right.
They do run a trial. They come back. 11 people wanted to convict her and sentence her to death. One guy could not do that. He didn't mind if she was going to stay in prison and die in prison, but he had a moral issue about actually sentencing her to die.
Right.
So that's when the DA came to me with my attorney and everything and said, look, you know what just happened? Here's the deal. As there's the law about taking responsibility for being the head of the household to things that happen within your family and stuff, and you're the head of the household, I'm going to offer you a one-time deal only. And if you don't take it, I will have a better jury pick next time. I will convict your wife. I will sentence her to death. And then you'll have to explain to your son one day why you didn't, do something.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, now you got 10 minutes. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. If you take responsibility for the crimes that happened in the household, I'll give you a maximum of 13 years. No harm, no foul. You'll be out in time to see your son graduate high school. At this point in time, my son is only 3 years old. It says we'll release your wife, return your son to your wife, and your family will know that you stood up, you were a stand-up guy, you did all this stuff for them, and everything will work out. you've got 5 minutes to make this decision. Now, of course, if you don't do this, I will make sure she dies. I'll make sure that, that it's well known that you had the opportunity to stop it. You could have saved her. Your son's going to know that you didn't do it. You're supposed to be this guy who's always there for other people. Are you not going to be there for your wife? Oh, by the way, you got 3 minutes to make this decision. Now I'm getting ready to, when I walk out of here, the deal is off the table. You got 90 seconds. What are you going to do? And I looked at my attorney and she goes, best deal we're going to get. So I took the deal for 13 years.
Wow.
We've come to find out that the guy who was dealing with me was an assistant district attorney. But the DA, a guy named Ed Hunt in Fresno County, had been the student aide for Dr. Wetmore for more than 2 years.
No way.
Yeah. And then both the judges in my wife's case and my sentencing judge turned out to have been students of his. But we don't find this out till long after the fact. This is what's come out to be. And so when he said that he had long reaches into the judicial system, he had long reaches in the judicial system. And when you think about that, a good number of the appellate court judges in the 5th Appellate District in California all come out of the Fresno County courts. And the DA that handled my case was shortly after that promoted to a judge.
Yeah.
So there's all this. Well, then what ends up happening is I get into the prison system, and the laws change. And in 1989, they came in first with a law that said you have all the guys, because even though I was guaranteed that the actual sentence was 27 years to life. But because they had put the stipulation I'd only do 13, meant when I got to half of that, I would go home. The DA was not going to argue against my parole, none of this. But then they came in 89, and a law got passed that took away all good time from you. So suddenly, instead of even going to the board at that time, now I don't even go to the board to 18 years. That's the first thing. And then they bring in another law that says that the governor will have the right to review and revoke any paroles granted. Again, this is 5 years after I'm in prison. Well, there's a thing called ex post facto, and it's a part of the U.S. Constitution, part of the California Constitution. It says you cannot make a law today that will negatively affect someone and run it retroactively backwards to encompass those already under it. But they did that to everybody that was in prison prior to that, suddenly gets encompassed under that. So then in California, we had Governor Pete Wilson, who had been the mayor of San Diego, and he came in and said, I have a no parole policy. And so for 2 terms, he wasn't paroling anybody once that law had come into effect. And
was he the guy that did 3 strikes?
No. That came under Gray Davis.
Okay.
But Gray Davis, who was a Democrat and had been in public service for like 26 years, suddenly he becomes governor and he takes Republican views of Pete Wilson and continues the no parole policy. Right. It wasn't until Arnold Schwarzenegger got in, and initially Arnold Schwarzenegger said the Correctional Guard Union is corrupt. They've got too much political power and stuff, because they were the ones that were really the catalyst behind building more prisons. Because you've got the union and you only got this many members. But you get a new prison and you get more members. Get more members, you got more clout. Well, they actually started, the Guards Union suddenly incorporated all the medical staff, the nurses and medical techs and stuff, which never had been under the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. Mm-hmm. Suddenly they do it, and they now get to wear the little badge on their uniform. Then they start getting like the cooks in their thing, and so they build this thing. Of course, every time they get a prison, they now get all these extra staff. They get the staff. Now they need another prison. So they went from 2 prisons and 9 men's institutions and 2 women's institutions when I came to prison, and only about 36,000 people, to where they eventually got up to almost 34 prisons and more than 220,000 inmates. So you can imagine the staff they need for all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this thing, but anyway, Schwarzenegger came in and said, I'm going to stomp on this. I'm going to break the power band on the correctional officers thing. And he did release some lifers really quickly after he got in. And then all of a sudden, he stopped. And then he didn't. And then next thing you know, he gives them a new contract bonus package and stuff. And the guards had their own gang thing called the Green Wall. And these were guards that did basically ganged up in the prison. And they were the ones that were involved with AdSeg, gladiator games, and doing things where they were putting guys in with guys who were known to rape other men, and they were all this stuff. And they were, and there was even a Congresswoman, Jackie Spears, who started doing an investigation. Suddenly she started getting all these anonymous death threats, and though it was never quite proven, it was always kind of suggested that they may have been behind all that too. So then Schwarzenegger, of course, leaves office. We get Jerry Brown back. He'd been the governor back in the 70s, and his dad was back in the 60s. So, but he'd been 2-time governor. Now he's back, and he gets to be 2-time governor again. And then all of a sudden, Schwarzenegger, it comes out about Schwarzenegger's love child that he had with the maid. And so, who knew about that? And of course, the correctional officers have a really good, investigation unit,
I bet they do.
And those things get dropped out to the news media. Yeah. And of course that ruins that. And of course, at that point in time, there was a big push on to change the U.S. Constitution, make a new amendment to allow non-U.S. born citizens to be able to run for president, because there was a big push about the idea Arnie could be the first,
Right.
Well, of course, that just disappeared.
Yeah.
And he went back to making, movies, The Expendables and things like that. And basically now I saw an article recently where he's self-isolating with his miniature horses in his house.
Great.
I mean, so look at where how far that goes. Yeah. So there was all this. Well, we found out that one of the things that was affecting me was I got a probation officer's report, and it was only 3 pages long, and it was very kind of like, this is this and this is this, and it wasn't much of anything. But when I'd go to these boards, they go, well, what about this crime? And I'd go, what crime? Well, it's, we have it on good authority that you did this and this and this. No, I didn't. Well, what about this? I don't know what you're talking about. We come to find out not until 2000, I believe it's 2013, that there was an actual 11-page probation officer report that had been put in my confidential file, which you're not allowed to see. Inmates aren't allowed to see the confidential file. Right. But a copy of it had been handed to my attorney by the DA, who had access to the confidential file. Even my attorney didn't have that. And in this, they had all these charges that crimes I was supposed to do. Some of them was during the time I was on active duty in the military.
So
and it's like, well, wait a minute. How could I be doing this and doing that? And there was one of the big things was, it was like just before I went in the military, supposedly I had like 14 violent and serious felonies that I was supposedly arrested for like 2 months before I went in the military. What? Yeah. And suddenly there's nothing there, right? And funny enough, when immigration deported me, they actually gave me a copy of my FBI file. And the only charges that were on my FBI file was the charges I had pled guilty to on the case that I went to prison for. And then there were 2 previous ones that I did know about where when I had my bike shop, somebody didn't want to pay me for the work on their motorcycles. So I put mechanics liens on them. Well, they initially filed theft charges.
Right.
But on both of those charges, it says dismissed in the interest of justice by the district attorney. Because once I showed that I had filed all the documents for a mechanics lien, and then they filed stolen bikes after that, and one of them I even still had the bounce check he gave me. But the thing was that because in the United States, if you get arrested, it automatically goes into your file. But those are the only charges there. There were no massive juvenile charges. There were no other adult charges. There was none of this. So, but that just showed that somebody had orchestrated to have that put in my confidential file to basically bugger me up when I went to boards. Because, of course, when the board expects you to say, yeah, I did that, and you're going, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
It goes against everything. So,
So you wind up in, where's the first prison that they send you to?
Well, they sent me to at that time, California had 2 reception centers. One was in Southern California. It was the California Institution for Men, what they called Chino, CIM. And the northern one was California Medical Facility, CMF, Vacaville. So I went to the northern one. So I go to Vacaville, and it's not considered a prison. The only 2 prisons are actually Folsom and San Quentin. They're the only 2 level 4, 2 maximum security. Everything else are institutions, facilities, things like that. They're not.
And this is 1984?
1984, right.
Okay.
And so I get there, and I'm there for a few months. And my first job within 3 days of being there is I have the chief medical officer and the captain of the institution come to my cell, pop it open, and ask me to come work for him as a surgical tech because of my medical background.
Right.
And at that time, the Department of Corrections did train inmates to be certified nursing assistants, lab technicians, X-ray technicians. Guys were able to actually learn how to do these things and have good jobs to get out.
Yep.
But so I go there and I do it, and I work for a few months in there to the point that when they decide they were going to transfer me, the chief medical officer actually went to bat and said, no, we'd like to keep him because he's really helping our situation out here. Right. And they said, no, he just came in. He's got to go through the whole route. He's a level 4. He's got to go up to, San Quentin. So I'm supposed to go to San Quentin. But the one thing that became a standard with bus transfers in prison is that almost never do you go to the prison that you're told you're going to, and they initially put you on the bus for. So I get told I'm going to San Quentin. They marked San Quentin on my property, which is a small bag. That's all I have at the time. I get on the bus, and we leave out. And first thing we do, we go up into the mountains. We go up to Jamestown, which is a fire camp training. They drop off some guys there. Then we shoot over, and we go to Old Folsom. We pull in, and it's such a moment. We rode on these like old type school buses. They were painted kind of almost a dove gray, battleship type gray.
Gray goose.
Yeah, gray goose. Yeah, that's what they call it. And so you go through, East Gate, and it's got the tower there, and I mean it's very medieval, castle-y looking type thing. Big iron gates, and when you come through, you hear the gate slam behind you. Boom! And it just reverberates through the bus, And guys who'd been there before, you'd see them kind of shudder for a moment. And then it comes out the other side, and you go down the road, you go past Tower 13, which is considered to be the most haunted tower at the prison, because that's where in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was their behavior management unit. They used to take guys, they had dungeon cells, and they would soak down canvas straitjackets and put guys in them. And then as they would dry, they would squeeze off. And guys actually came out losing hands and stuff. Oh. And of course, it pained, and guys would scream and stuff. And the guards would still write this up years later when I was a clerk. I used to read the old logs and even the new logs, and they'd say they'd hear chains, they'd hear moaning, there were guards who just absolutely didn't want to work that tower. But anyway, you go down around that and you come in through Westgate. when you came into Westgate, you come up on the main yard. The yard's cleared because they're bringing new guys on the yard. Bus stops, you get off the bus does a backup, turns around, and leaves. And there was this really ominous feel that, my God, this is like the end of the world. This is where all the buildings are made out of granite that had been quarried right from there, you know? And I mean, it just, you could feel the misery and the hopelessness from men who had served there years ago and men who died there. And there was a big graveyard up on the hill, Folsom Graveyard. But the last person who got to be buried up there was a guy they called the Folsom Flea. And he was buried up there, and I believe it was 84, 85. He was the very last guy, and he'd been down since like the 40s. He'd done, him and his sister were like the last great, as they call them, stagecoach robbers, but they weren't stagecoach, but they were last great thing like that. Yeah. And he died there. But so I end up at Folsom, and stupidly I go, well, I'm supposed to go to San Quentin. And the guy goes, yeah. And just stares at me. Okay, I guess I'm not going. And then they tell me later I don't go because they'd had an incident at San Quentin and it was closed to intake. Well, normally incidents that would close prisons were riots, some other kind of unrest that was going on, maybe just different gangs were starting to power up, or if there was some kind of illness, and so they would quarantine that prison and nobody go in and out of that prison type thing. And at one point in time, they actually were still, if you were supposed to parole that day and they suddenly threw it on lockdown, they'd tell you, well, technically you're a free man, but we're going to keep you here until we get the all clear from medical. And so you might spend 2, 3, 4 more days as a free man sitting in there hoping that you don't get pulled into anything. Wow. Because then you get parole violation and everything else and you're back on the mix. So I'm there for just about 8 months. And then I finally get my transfer to San Quentin from there. And so I ended up getting to go to both of the 2 big houses and stuff. But I ended up being at 11 prisons over my 34 and a half years. And I did twice at Old Folsom and twice at DVI, Dual Vocational Institution, which is Gladiator School. Yeah. And I just wrote my second book, and I've just turned my manuscript in. And one of the things I did is I picked the 3 prisons that I had done the most time at. Folsom was one, and DVI was the other, and then California Men's Colony was in between them. And I wrote about the 2 prisons I'd been at the longest, having come back to it, how much it had changed from when I first went there to when I came back, changes in the prison thing. But these were 3 very distinctively different prisons. And that's why I wanted to use these as examples. Because California Men's Colony was nothing like a prison. It always got joked about being the home of the stars because a lot of people of, Ike Turner, Christian Brando and people who had stars, I think, got sent there on a regular basis. Right. And there was more programming than any other prison, more industry stuff. So there was more money at that prison than anywhere else. And it was just kind of a weird thing. I mean, we had people who came into the AA program, come up every week. There was like 4 rotation of groups. And I don't know if you ever saw Seinfeld. You ever watch Seinfeld? Yep. Okay. George's father, the guy who played George's father. Yep. He used to come into there as one of the people as a recovering, addict or drunk. And then there was a program called Mayberry RFD. Remember that? No. Okay. I remember Andy Griffith. I remember. Yeah. Okay. Well, they did a later one, and it was Ken Berry, who'd been in the program F Troop. Well, he's now like the main character in Mayberry RFD. And there was this real goody girl they called Millie. The character's name is Millie. Right. Well, this gal used to come up, and whenever we always knew when she was coming up because we get the heads up, and there'd be more people who come to the AA meetings when she came up because of the fact that she would come in and talk about that she had such a hard time when she'd leave the stage or leave the studio after playing this super goody girl, that she would just despised herself because she knew she was never that good. And she'd talk about driving the streets of Hollywood, and trying to find the grodiest, drunk just to have sex with, just to debase herself, because that's how she felt. And she'd of course be drunk and stuff.
Wow.
And of course the guy's like, oh, I got to go hear her talk, that type of thing.
Right. No kidding.
And it was that kind of a weird, that place was just weird because there was that kind of a thing. We also had the most lesbian and gay correctional officers there, and it was just, so.
Sounds like a party.
Well, it was just a weird place. You didn't, and the thing was, the only gang members could be there were ones that had dropped out, debriefed. So you didn't really have any gang problems. But every once in a while, some of the dropout guys would see that there were cripples there and people that were kind of more on the weaker type thing. They'd want to try to muscle them out of stuff. Mm-hmm. Whenever that happened, those guys would then get gaffled up and they'd be sent back to a main line. Well, of course, if you've debriefed out,
you don't want to go back to the main line.
And so guys, there were a number of times you'd be going to work and you'd hear some guy being dragged out of ADSEG going, no, I'll be killed. And weeks later, we'd hear the word that sure enough, they got put up on Folsom or, some other prison line. Sure enough, they were killed.
Wow.
And so it was kind of a big incentive not to get in trouble.
Yeah. So how do you navigate this world? You're now thrown into this, and by all accounts, you're really not a criminal. Now, you might have committed a crime by moving the body and everything like that, but this is not like a life of crime. So you're now injected into this system with a bunch of people that probably are criminals legitimately. How do you wind your way through this maze without stepping on the wrong guy's toes? Or are you the wrong guy?
Here's the thing. Here's part of the deal. Because I grew up as I did, never being able to depend on other people for the most part, right? I always learned how to take care of myself and do what I need, whether it be doing mechanic work, doing, building repairs, whatever. I was always the guy, you have a bad roof, you call me, I tell you, buy the materials, I'll fix it for you. So your car breaks down, I come over, I fix your car for you, Right. So the thing was, but the problem was I had a hard time coming to you and saying, hey, Charlie, could you help me with something? Right. That didn't happen. And the thing was that besides being in the military, I also ended up riding with a motorcycle club as part of my being a biker. The funny part was the club, I didn't go seeking out to join a club. They just happened to have their the center part of their club at this one apartment complexes that I was living in San Diego when I first opened up my shop. Mm-hmm. And they needed a good mechanic, and I was a mechanic. And so it was kind of, they found out I'm a mechanic and stuff. So I kind of got invited in kind of that way. And the thing was that even though I was with them and I would ride with them and then go on runs and stuff, I didn't really feel I was connected to them as far as a lot of the quote brotherhood that you're always there type thing. Because again, I wouldn't ask for help. It didn't come about till we had a guy who was named Dwarf. He wanted to be sponsored for the club, and nobody would sponsor him because one, he was short statured, and two, because the way he proved that he should be able to be accepted was we had two guys, one called Big Bear, one called Little Bear. They were brothers. They were like 6'6", 6'5", 235 pounds, 230 pounds, massive guys. And Dwarf made the comment, hey, tell you what, you pick your toughest guy. If I can knock him, if I can get him down on the ground and get him to call me daddy, I get to be prospected, right? And everybody's like, well, that's not going to happen. So Big Bear volunteers, so I'll take care of him. Rah, rah, rah. Goes out there to fight him, and I'm being quiet because I know there's something's not right here. This guy is just too confident. Well, he had a pair of jeans that had a painter pocket, what painter pockets are on the side of jeans. and he had a pair of vice grips in that pocket that were down to where they were just barely opened. And as Big Bear started running, he runs up, he drops down, he pulls these vice grips out, and he grabs him right on the inner thigh, right up towards his crotch. And you can hear the snap of the vice grips locked down. And he's now behind Big Bear, and he's twisting this thing two-handedly. And Big Bear's got one leg out to the side, and he's bouncing, he's crying, he's screaming, you know, but he can't even bring himself to try to grab him because it's just so painful. And he's yelling, call me daddy, call me daddy, call me daddy, call me daddy. And Little Bear's like wanting to jump into the fray because, you know, this is my brother you're doing. And so the other club officers are getting everybody keeping. Finally, Big Bear goes, okay, daddy. And you hear the pop coming, and he comes hobbling back over, and he goes over and he pulls it down. Look, and he's got this like big old bruise forming, a blood blister starting. Well, because he did that, a number of the guys in the club were against him because, that was cheating.
Right.
There weren't any rules. We sent the biggest guy we had to fight the smallest guy. There were nobody said you can't punch me in the face, you can't kick me in the balls. There was no rules. I saw that as being great improvising, you know.
Right.
And so when they came around, they asked who'd sponsor him. Nobody was doing it. So I stood up and said, I'll do it. And everybody's like, but you don't sponsor people. I said, yeah, but I will him. Well, what ended up happening was that Dwarf and I had this kind of weird, almost spiritual bond type thing, to where I would get ready to go do something, and out of the blue, he'd show up. Oh, yeah, I got a feeling you were going to go off, you know. And he would be there for me all the time. And so even when I got busted and I went to jail, all he used to do, he'd come down to see me and he'd put notes up there. You know, I could get you out of here. You know, I could blow the building up and get you out of here. And things like that. And
got to have a guy like that on your side. You know, you got to have a guy like Dwarf to have your back.
And the thing was that he was 4'10" barefoot, but he had boots that had like 2-inch soles, and then they had like 2-inch inside. So he was like 5'2.5", 5'3", you know, somewhere in there, but he was like 130 pounds with 16-inch arms, and he had the heart of an 800-pound gorilla, you know. Yeah. And the only way if you looked at a picture of him, you wouldn't know he was dwarf. But if you looked at his fingers, they were all kind of shortened down by about a half a knuckle type thing, you know. And so he was on the tall end of dwarfism and stuff. But he took me to things like the Little People's of America convention in Chicago one time. I got to meet Billy Barty, who at that time was the president and stuff. But anyway, Dwarf and I became like this just inseparable partners. And he became like the brother I never had and the guy that I could always depend on no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we had that bond. Well, when I went to prison, he would come up to visit me from time to time. And he had done time in Lompoc Federal Prison. Mm. He ended up killing a federal agent dog. You know, when they first started making dogs, law enforcement officers, they came to raid his house because they believed he was involved in some gun running. Didn't find any guns, but he ended up killing this dog. And so they gave him, you can't kill a dog. And so they gave him like 5 years in that. And he did about 3 years, 6 months or something. But so he'd done time in that. But with me, what happened was I was 30 years old. And I had all the tattoos I had from the streets. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them were done by guys who had done prison time and still used prison type machines.
Right.
But they were all done on the street. So showing up at 30 years old, being a biker, I had long hair back then, all my tattoos, and the fact that I didn't care to be a part of things. I just kind of stayed. Most people assumed I had done time somewhere. They couldn't believe that this would be like the first time. You may have been done in another state or whatever, but you've done time before. And I had guys tell me all the time, yeah, you've done time before. You may not want to say, but you've done time before. And so for me, that was kind of the deal. But at the same time, there was the issue where fear was a terrible thing in prison. And people had that always going around. Like I said, sometimes you could smell it on the yard when there was like real guys out there that just knew things were going to happen to them. It would just permeate the air, and there was a thickness in the air that you could almost feel pushing on you. And with me, guys would come up and go, "Hey, you want to come on hang out with us?" No. "Well, why do you want to hang out? We're all right." "Yeah, that's fine. I don't have a problem with you guys. I just don't want to hang out with you." Right. And so it caused me to get into some issues with people. But with me, the thing was, if I tell you to leave me alone, I mean leave me alone.
Yeah.
So if you try to push yourself on me, you're going to find that I'm going to be solid, and 2, I'm going to push back. You know, and the first 5-6 years I was in prison, I was in a good number of fights, but most of them in the prison at that time, in the gyms or like at Folsom and San Quentin on the yards, they had boxing rings on the yards called smokers. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, if you challenge somebody to go in the smoker, he can't turn you down, no matter who he is. Because if he turns you down, if he's a nobody, everybody's going to run him off the yard.
Right.
But if he belongs to a particular group, he's representing them. And if he backs down without going in there, then they're going to deal. So when I got challenged to smokers, I didn't belong to nobody. And with me, it was more the idea that, okay, we're going to just have to deal with this and get this over and done with. And so with me, my biggest thing was to go in there, and like I was been told in the service, the gunny sergeant said, when you get in a fight, says you don't have to be the toughest guy ever. You don't have to be the strongest guy. Says what you've got to be is the guy who's willing to go the one step further than the other guy's willing to go. So he said, if you hit somebody, you hit him and you keep hitting him. And every time he moves, you hit him. Every time you hit him, he moves. So the idea is until he stops moving, basically.
Right.
So the other thing was that I remember guys that had talked about taking martial arts, and they would train, and a lot of schools in California would train you to stop your punch just before you hit the person. And my gunny said that when you swing on somebody, visualize putting your fist 6 inches through past them. Mm-hmm. So when you hit them with as much power as you can, and try to run your hand all the way through them. Mm-hmm. So because nobody knew me, nobody knew anything about me, the moment I got into a ring, they're going with somebody they know. Oh, this guy's fights, and this guy was Golden Gloves. And I didn't know any of that. I knew barroom brawl and what I learned in the military. And so my thing was, nobody gives a shit who comes in second. So I'm going to do as much damage as I can to you as quickly as I can. So not only will you know I don't want to be messed with, the guys watching will know I don't want to be messed with. And that's how it worked. And quite honestly, the first 5 years I was in prison, I really didn't buddy up with anybody. I didn't really pretty much hang with any, even cellies. I was respectful to them and gave them basic conversation, but I didn't go into a big deal with everybody because I just didn't want to be a part of other people's stuff. On the yards, I would talk to guys who were other bikers because we talk about motorcycle stuff. I didn't do drugs, so as soon as the conversation turned to drugs, I'd walk off because I have nothing to do with the drugs.
Right.
And so on and on like that. So, but because I stood up to different factions of different groups, it did cause people to think that I thought I was better than they were, and they thought I was kind of impeding on their authority. And I try to explain to them, I have nothing to care about your authority. Just leave me the hell out of it. Whatever you guys do, I don't care. But of course, in prison, the thing is that you get listed by things. The funny thing was, I was listed as an other when I first went into prison because I claimed Manx, and nobody knew what a Manx was.
Right.
So the whites were confused because they didn't know. Some of the guards thought that somehow somebody screwed up, and actually they were trying to say Mex for Mexican.
Right.
I have to go, no, M-A-N-X, Manx. And then they go, what the hell's Manx? And I say, okay, on the Isle of Man, there's a cat, no tail. See, I don't have a tail either. You know, I do that kind of thing, right?
Right.
But then again, the others' car didn't want to accept me because at that time, others were Asians, Native American, Pacific Islanders. And that's one of the things I talk about when I did my first book was when I went to DVI, when I got down there in 86, I bump heads with the head shot caller of the others, who is half Samoan and half Maori. You know, he's a guy pineapple, and the guy's got like 26-inch arms and a 60-inch chest and all this stuff.
Yeah, they're big dudes.
Yeah. And the thing was, he tells me, you can't be an Islander. So, well, what the hell you mean I can't be? I'm from the Isle of Man. How much more? He goes, no. He goes, you're European. You know, and your point being what? You're not an Islander. And I had just completed the task of getting accepted into the 300-pound weight club. So I could bench, at that time, I could bench a little over 300 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he was involved in that because, of course, he could bench like 600 some odd pounds.
Right. Right.
You know, and so I actually, in my book, I tell the story about my meeting the guy, and then he comes to me. I'm in the gym and I'm doing just a little workout, and he comes over and tells me, look, I don't want to hear you ever call yourself an Islander. I'm gonna smash you. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I'm telling you, you can't call yourself an Islander. Well, now to me, he just put a challenge out.
Right.
And like I said, and I don't have to prove anything to anybody but me. So what I end up doing, I end up slinging on him, and I break this hand. And I don't know if you can see the scar right there.
Yeah, I can see it.
I had to place a lunate bone in my hand. I broke all these knuckles across my top of my thing.
Yeah.
And I moved him back about 3 steps.
Oh, jeez.
But I broke his jaw. Yeah. And he grabs me and he picks me up and he slams me, and he picks me up and he slams me, and he bounces me off the walls, everything else. Yeah. And I'm down there. He's got a couple of guys with him. There was a black guy that I used to do some light work out. He had been near me, but he walked away when he saw they come up on me. So he's sitting off to the side. I get up and he's like, I'm done with you. So I'm not done with you. And we turned around. I hit him with this hand and broke these knuckles across here.
Oh,
so now both my hands are, and again, I move him back a few steps. And again, he body slams me, he bounces me off the wall, bounces me off the floor to the point where I can't breathe. I mean, I'm so seriously out of breath from just having everything pushed out of me. And he just starts laughing, and he just walks away with these guys. And I hear him tell one of them, I got to go to the infirmary. Well, that's where I work, is the infirmary.
Right.
So the black guy comes running over and goes, man, that was like, man, if I'd known you were going to do that, I could have sold tickets and made some money out of this. He goes, that's got to be the craziest thing I've ever seen done. He goes, did you really think you were going to knock him down? So, hey, I felt I had to take the chance,
Right.
Well, then I go to work, and I go into the nurse, and I said, yeah, I had a weight pile injury. I've hurt my hands. And she says, okay, well, go to the x-ray and get him x-ray just so make sure everything's okay. As I'm walking up, he's coming out, and we look at each other, and he goes down to the treatment area. The nurse tells the inmate x-ray tech, hey, x-ray his hands. He had a weight pile injury. And the guy looks at me and looks at her and looks at the pineapple walking away and goes, second one today. Because he told me he had a weight pile injury. And I go in there, and this one was broke, had a bone in my hand that had to be replaced. And we go in, we sit on the benches, two tables apart from each other, and he just kind of looks at me, kind of smiles and stuff. And because I worked in the clinic, he'd come over. I had access to ice cream and fruit and stuff, so I'd make milkshakes for people who had wired jaws. So I made him all these, and then I give him extra ice cream for his partners and stuff. And eventually, about 2 months later, I got invited out to come to a luau for his birthday, though he couldn't eat. And he tells me, "Look, you know, you're not tough. You're not as tough as an Islander. You're not as strong as an Islander. You're not as big as an Islander, but you got the heart of an Islander." Yeah. He goes, "I can't speak for everybody, but as far as I'm concerned, here at DBI, the word is out. If you want to call yourself an Islander, you're more than welcome to. If you want to come and hang out with us from time to time, you're more than welcome to. We don't expect nothing from you. If we get into a tussle, get out of our way because you're not big enough to be a part of it." You know? Right. And that was that. I don't see Pineapple again for, gosh, like almost 20 odd years. And come to find out, he'd been lifting weights one day with an Olympic bar. And he had so much weight tied on it, it snapped. And he tried to hold the bar together, and it ripped all the muscles off his chest. Came this way. And so they ended up having to staple it all back together and all that. And so he was much smaller than when I remembered initially. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm no longer allowed to lift over 250 pounds anymore, and I'm not allowed this," you know. And again, I had a problem with a other car at Solano, is where I ran into him again. Bunch of young Tonga guys. Yep. And next thing they knew, he suddenly showed up from behind me. He had coming off another yard and told the guys, "Look, here's the deal. This is the guy that broke my jaw. So you got a choice. Accept him as he is or fight both of us." You know? And so immediately upon getting that kind of recommendation from him, everybody's like, "Oh, we're all good. We're all good." Because he was that respected as being a shot caller and for who he was. So, I mean, and one of the things I did after my first 5 years, like I said, after that, I did start talking to people. And the thing was, what I found out, there were a lot of guys in prison who couldn't read and write. And so because I could, I used to help guys write letters home. I used to help guys do some of their legal work as far as typing it up and getting people to help them fill it out. And so I built a back thing where I had a lot of people of different races that would be there if I needed somebody, just as a show of people behind me, that I was all right and people respected me. And so because of that, it grew to the fact that I was able to step up for young guys who didn't want to get caught up in the same stuff that was originally happening. And I was able to give them advice, because one of my favorite things I tell young guys in prison was, if you want gangs not to want you, then you've got to make yourself undesirable to them. And the first thing you do is you educate yourself, because no shot caller in the prison wants somebody smarter than him in his gang.
Right.
So I tell them, don't pick up comic books. Go and actually read books, electronic books, history books, geography, whatever, and start educating yourself, you know. And then the other thing was, I tell guys, if somebody comes up and asks you to hang out with them, first question you ask them is, "What are you going to do to help me get out of prison?" Because if they're not willing to try to help you get out, they're trying to help you stay in. And that puts them on the other side of the coin as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And so with me, the idea was that, and I tell them, if he can't do anything except encourage you to do the best you can to get home to your family, then that's all you need, is just the encouragement. He doesn't have to go to the board for you. He doesn't have to do anything. But if he encourages you and not tries to discourage you, you've got something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of really the thing, was just me not willing to back down, and knowing that I had to just accept whatever I chose to actually physically get myself involved in. I chose that. I wasn't getting caught up in other people's messes, because that's what got me in prison.
Well, so you've got this, so you do 34 years, 34 and a half years?
Yeah.
When you get released,
yeah,
luckily you have skills. You're a mechanic, you're a medical tech, you have all these things. But what about everybody else? are we not in California? I'm from California too. So I know that the prisons are overcrowded. They went to 3 strikes and you're out sort of philosophy. And what was happening was that just a lot of people were going in and they were coming out, getting in a revolving door, and then they're back at the Twin Towers getting processed again because they didn't have any sort of skills. Is there, if you were in charge of the prison system for, let's just say California, because you know it well, what would you change? What changes would you make to it so that the prison system was sending people out, but not, of course, taking them right back in a revolving door?
Okay, well, I've got a couple of suggestions that I've told people, and some people think they're a bit radical, type thing. The first thing is that the Department of Corrections requires you to work, when you come in, some kind of job. When I first went in, they used to actually utilize skills that you had. If you were a plumber on the streets, you'd be a plumber in prison. Electrician. Then about 1990, they started doing it where, oh, you're a plumber? Okay, we're going to put you on the yard crew to pick up trash. Oh, you're an electrician? Okay, well, we're going to put you in the bakery.
Mm-hmm.
And then guys wanted to get trades. They'd come out with vocations. One of the worst things about CDC's vocations, for the most part, is they're already outdated. By the time they get into the prison, they're outdated. When I was in the shoe factory, there was a big deal about, we were working on shoe machines, stitchers and sole layers and stuff that were from like the 1920s.
Right.
Then they tell us, oh, we're getting brand new machines. Everybody got excited. We're talking about, the mid of the 1990s. And they bring us 1950 machines. Well, that's not brand new. And the guy go, well, they're brand new to us.
Right.
Yeah. And the same thing is, auto body. Now auto body, you use laser sighting to check out the frame, frame and all that. No, they were still doing everything by hand and stuff and by eyeballing stuff. So the first thing I would say is all the vocations have to be upgraded to be as close to real job skills as possible. That's the first thing. The second thing is guys would go to their counselor and say, okay, I want to take auto mechanics. And they go, oh, okay, we're going to put you in paint. But I don't want to be in paint. Well, yeah, but we have an opening in paint. And when you send guys into vocations they don't want to be in, they're not going to participate. They're going to go, oh, no, we don't do now. And they do this. They would sit off and so instructors would say, well, you guys hang out over there. Just stay away from everything else. Don't touch anything. So that was a big thing. Now, I never agreed with the 3 strikes. Now, I will say that I will be very honest with you. There are people who need to be in prison.
Of course.
And there are people who need to be in prison the rest of their lives because they're just habitual predators of every kind of thing you can think of. Yeah. But the majority, I would say 85, 90% of the guys going into prison have a chance to change and become viable people. But one of the things that I thought they did wrong, because when they first came out with a halftime thing, everybody just got halftime. And basically, the guys that were not doing the life type stuff, they would come in, they come out, come out. And I used to hear guys say, oh yeah, I'm only doing 2 with half, And I used to hate them with saying only doing, Right. And even when they had gave them 80%, oh, I'm only doing 5 with 80, And so it became a joke. But then you got guys who suddenly nicked a couple of bicycles and now are doing a life sentence for it.
Right.
And then in the 2000s, they started giving out guys sentences without a life top, but 18-year-old kid who got busted for transportation of cookware for making meth. He went down, picked up a car full of glassware. That's
right.
all. No drugs, nothing else. And he went across multiple county lines, and they gave him charges in all the counties. and they gave him 350 years with halftime.
Wow.
And I thought, well, first off, you're just clowning the guy, because even halftime of 350 years, you're talking like 175 years.
Great.
Can't be done. And he can't earn any other good time. And then guys would get 500-year sentences, you know, and just weird thing. And then there are even a couple of guys I know that are in prison that 5 or 10 years after they went in, they changed the law, and the crime they were sentenced to prison for is now no longer a crime.
That's got to be frustrating as hell,
Yeah.
especially with marijuana.
Yeah. But there was like one guy, he was at a house party, and it was like 30 people at this house party. And he was basically getting with a couple of really pretty girls, and he was there for the free dope and free drinking and all that stuff. Well, apparently some guys that were talking about going and doing a robbery at like a house invasion robbery, and ended up killing a person. Well, when they busted one of the people that were involved in it, said, well, what about these other 30 people that were in the house? He goes, they were walking past us the whole time we were talking about it. They all know what we were up to. So they get this guy for the conspiracy of being an accessory to a felony that would be of a first-degree murder, robbery thing, and not notifying authorities of what he knew. And they gave him 65 years to life.
That's crazy.
5 years after he's in, they get rid of that. That law doesn't exist. He's appealed and appealed and appealed, and what courts have come back and said, well, what we think is this is just a good learning lesson, that should you hear somebody speaking about a crime in the future, that you'll notify authorities. What? You know, what? You know, so there's that. But what I thought is better than the halftime, better than you know, the strikeouts and stuff, is you sentence a guy to 5 years of positive programming. Okay? He's got to give the state 5 years of positive programming. He comes in, you offer him an education stuff, you offer him vocational stuff, you offer him return to society classes, health, self-help, all that. But the guy comes in, he wants to be kind of a dickhead. And so for 2 years, he doesn't go to jobs. Okay, well, those are his 2 years. That didn't come off his sentence because those aren't his. He didn't do positive program. Those are his years. Trust me, when the guy suddenly goes, I've got 8 years in right now. Yeah, but the first 5 was your years.
Right.
That's what wakes somebody up. When they realize that they're in prison because they're choosing to stay in prison. Instead of saying, you know what, I got 5 years to do. I'm not going to get caught up in the stupid stuff. I'm going to work. I'm going to get my education. I'm going to get my college. I'm going to get my vocation. I'm going to take every opportunity not to come back. And it's on me. It's my responsibility. Because what I found out is you cannot rehabilitate anybody. You can give them the tools to rehabilitate themselves, but you can't rehabilitate anybody. And that's kind of the big thing, is everybody goes, oh, we're going to put these programs in. When I first went to prison, the first big self-help they had at San Quentin was transcendental meditation. Mm-hmm. This was going to change everybody's outlook on life, and everybody's going to hug and kiss and be grateful for each other. Last one I took at DVI was Gogi. Going, it's getting out by getting in, and it's talking about self-reflection and learning about yourself and opening up your feelings to other men and all that. Well, I don't care how many self-help groups I went to. Every time they'd say, now, in this self-help group, we have a certain amount of, privacy and confidentiality. Nothing said in this group is to leave this group. Really? Really? Because information is power in prison.
Yep.
And there are guys who go into these groups only to be able to field information on other people. That's all they're there for.
I bet.
So that's why I say, if you take away the thing about trying to force somebody to rehabilitate in that respect of making, you're going to rehabilitate, we're going to, and send them back out there, and they're not trained what they want to do, they're not getting the support and stuff, you're not going to get it. But if you make it to where they're now having to do this, and the reason I say this worked, I thought, was there was a kid, and I used to tell guys, I could tell if when they were getting out if they were going to come back. And there was this one guy that I knew, about 25 years old, had a young wife, couple of babies, and he was like, yeah, I'm getting ready to get out and stuff. And I walked over and I told him, well, you'll be back. What? I said, you'll be back. You'll be back probably, 6 months, you'll be back. Oh, I won't be back. Yeah, you will. So he gets out, and it's like the very beginning of the year. And I get a Christmas card from him. He says, ha, 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 I proved you wrong. I've been out almost a year. I'm getting ready to discharge my parole. I've gone to college. I've joined the union, I think welding union. My wife and I are happier than ever. We're going to be buying a house next year after I become a full journeyman, blah, blah, blah. He goes, you were wrong. So I write him back and I said, congratulations. And he writes me back. He goes, you tricked me. You son of a bitch. You tricked me. The thing was, I was trying to explain to him, it wasn't that I wanted him to come back. I would like to challenge him not to come back. And he had to have the right reasons to. And the right reason was he didn't want me to see him come back in the yard and go, see, told you you'd be back. He did not want to face that. And he didn't want other guys to go, yeah, well, you were told you're going to be back and you are. So he had to prove me wrong. And I wasn't unhappy at all about that. And that's why you put the responsibility on the guy. If somebody wants to stay in prison for 20 odd years because they don't want to program, that's on them. That has nothing to do because they weren't sentenced to that. Those are their days. You go to the hole, that's your days. That's the whole thing, is you got to make people be responsible for what their actions are. That's kind of, and like I said, I've had staff go, well, that's kind of radical. No, it's not. It's very straightforward. You want your child to do right, you've got to have the right incentive to make him do right. Yeah.
What about your book? You wrote one book. You've got a second book out. Tell us about the first book.
Yeah, the first book is this one, 34 Years in Hell. And this one here basically starts off, it talks about my being born over here, my going to Canada, and my going to America, being in the military, biker. And then 90% of the book is about my prison time. People I met, Charles Manson, Ed Kemper, the Chowchilla kidnappers. You being California, you probably know about them. You know, and all these different guys. And I was up close and personal. I mean, I actually was within touching distance of these guys and spoke to them on a number of occasions. But my second book, a lot of people read my book because I originally wrote 101,000 words, but the editors took it down to 73,000 words. I've gotten excellent reviews. It's sold more than 20,000 copies.
Wow. Good job. That's tough to do.
Yeah. And that's in less than a year because it was June 27th last year, day before my mom's birthday, that it got published. And everybody says it's an easy read, very quick. They like the flow of it. But the reviews I got from people saying, well, we wish you'd said more about like day-to-day stuff in prison. And we wish you'd told us more about this subject or that subject. So the book I wrote now, and I've submitted to them, and they've already been back to me once on it. They're trying to decide how they want to take it because I sent them another 100,000 word manuscript. Is I went into what people asked about. I talked about what tattoos meant, in the prisons. I talked about lockdowns because we were on lockdown, and I talked about lockdown boxes and how that, and because we've had the COVID-19, I spoke about in California about the Valley fever and the norovirus lockdowns and how things were done. So I'm trying to touch on things people. I spoke about my hobby, my wood carving, and I did do some pictures of some of my hobby work, and I put some of my short stories in this book. And so I kind of gave an idea of what I did to keep my sanity, basically. I spoke about, like, say, the 3 prisons and the differences in them and how the 2 had changed from the first time I was there and the second time I was there. And then I also, because the first book I talked about the infamous, notorious people I knew. Mm-hmm. There were so many non-famous people, but guys that were involved in my life, and in one way or another, we had certain interactions. So I put a bunch of them in there, and I tell what their crimes were, and I tell whether they're still in prison or whether they're paroled or if they've died or if they've committed suicide. So I've given this whole thing, and I tell them, I said, I'm not giving judgment on any of these guys. That's up to the readers to decide whether these were good men, bad men, and I mean, so I've done that, but I went through and I talked about weapons, what weapons were made of, and how easy and things like this, and gambling. I talked about the gambling. I talked about pets in prison because we had pets, and I talked about the variety of pets and things, and so I talked about canteen and how we get quarterly food packages sent in, and the chow hall food. And so I kind of tried to answer questions people had asked and fill in there. And so now my editors are trying to decide what direction they want to guide me in on it, because they've been really happy with my first book, and they really want to do my second book. And they currently have the right to my second book. There had been a few people who've actually inquired about possibly trying to turn my first book into some kind of media thing, such as a miniseries, a film, a documentary, stuff. Jokingly over here, one of my mates that I've got over here, he says, I could see it as a feature film. I could see it as a TV of the week movie. I could see it as a serial. I could see it as I could see it as a play. I could see it as a musical like Billy Elliot, and I could see it as a panto, which over here I haven't been to a panto, but I've heard all about. But anyway, so I've had support people over here. But there's been, like I said, I was supposed to have a number of talks. I've done a few talks. I went to the Isle of Man last year in the fall. I did an interview on Manx Radio, which is on my. If you go to the Jamie Morgan Kane YouTube, you'll find the 2 little things I did for them. And then I went back with Sean, and we went to Jerby Prison. We went to the prison over there. I got invited by the governor to come in and speak to. And Sean's got that on him on one. He's got it somewhere. I don't know, because quite honestly, like I said, funny enough, I'd been telling people for years I would never have a cell phone. I don't need a cell phone. I had nobody to call. The only person I knew over here was the person I was going to be staying with, and I didn't need a phone. And I also joked I'd get a CB radio because I knew I used CB. I said, no, and he goes, well, nobody uses them. I said, well, that means the airways are open. So I'll have a CB. Well, when I first got home, I was given a little cell phone. And the first thing I knew is they didn't give you instructions. And I struggled. I struggled terribly trying to, I kept telling me I had texts. And I'd go, okay, what's my text? I seriously did not know how to get to a text. I thought maybe voice activated, It's kind of like if you watch the Star Trek one with the whales, I think Star Trek 3.
Right.
And they tell Scotty to use the computer, and he picks up the mouse and he goes, computer.
That was you.
I think. But see, you got to understand, and this is what I try telling people. When I went to prison, gas was 89 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
Big Macs were 65 cents.
Yeah.
We had no cellular phones. We had cordless phones, but you could only walk about 30 feet from the box and you'd lose signal. The only car phones were generally executives and a few police detectives. And where I was living in Fresno, they'd only given us ATM machines about 6 months before I got arrested.
Right.
Well, where I'm living now in London is where the first ATM machine was put up in like late 60s, early 70s.
Wow.
And I've been to the bank where it says there's a sign saying this is the first ATM, done.
Funny.
Yeah, so there were a lot of things. And then, of course, coming over here, I had to get used to the tube system. Never been on a tube. I'd never been on a train in America. I mean, I owned cars. I had motorcycles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's not that big a deal. And if people don't know, in California, train travel is non-existent, really.
Yeah, I mean, they have Amtrak, but I mean, I never knew anybody who took it.
Yeah, me either.
And so it was just one of these things. So I come over here, and I right out of Heathrow, I have to get on a tube. Having been in prison, the first thing is you don't let people get within arm's reach of you if you don't really know who they are. I'm on the tube. I've got people right up against me, like
yeah,
and I'm doing everything I can not to just get off me type thing, you know.
Yeah.
And, so I've gotten used to the tubes and the buses and stuff. But I got my license last year, got my car. Funny enough, they don't really have Chevrolets over here, which is what I drove in the States all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You do have Fords. What they have is they have a Chevrolet like affiliate thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called Vauxhall. And I got a Vauxhall Mariva. And it's actually not a bad car. I actually got one that was like 2007, and it only had like 21,000 miles because people over here own cars and don't drive them.
Right. That's crazy.
I mean, if people put like 2,000 miles a year on their cars, I mean, you know, I was putting, you know, more than that, you know, per week on my motorcycle, you know, that type of thing. But funny enough, I didn't notice till I got the car home, and a couple days later I was washing it. And the Mariva model I've got says Life on the side of it.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was like, wow, you know, how you know, but it's a great little car. I had a mechanic check it over because it's got the computer. You got to talk to the computer. Yeah. And it has only had a couple of minor switches changed in it in all the years, you know, 14, 15 years when. So, yeah, I mean, so I'm adjusting. Quite honestly, the only two things I haven't gotten over here so far is I haven't got a motorcycle yet, and I haven't got a puppy. You know, I still would like to have both, you know.
Well, where could people go to buy 34 Years in Hell?
Well, it's on sale on Amazon.
Okay.
It's there. It's also like, I know you like if you're. I know it's Amazon over there in States. I don't know where else in the States it is. But like if you're like in the UK, it's W.H. Smith, and I did book signing there. It's Waterstones will order it for you. Foyle's Books. I do know my book has been sold in India because I saw the article, the advertisement where it was being paid for in rupees.
That's cool.
Australia, parts of Europe, Northern Europe, throughout the United States. But yeah, I mean. It's but like there's a thing called Goodreads that gives reviews, and
yeah,
I've got like quite a few, 80 odd some odd, and everybody's really, you know, pleased with it. And I mean, so for the most part, I mean, there's been a couple of people that, because one of the things I didn't understand when I got out was trolls, you know.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's hard to understand them still because it's a weird mentality.
You don't have that in prison. You know why?
Oh, because you're in prison, because you'll get dealt with.
Somebody says something about you. Now, you could be the guy that goes, well, I'm not going to care what he says. No. Somebody says something about you that's a bit derogatory or, you know, like that, could get you stabbed, depending on what he says.
Yeah.
So with me, first time somebody said something about, you know, I walk over to the guy that this guy says, hey, Joe just said that you know, beat up this girl out here on the street. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I can grab them, Joe up and go, so who told you? Oh, he said it over there. And I'd walk it all the way back to the guy. And I'd have all these people who were part of this thing. And I'd tell the guy, now you tell me where it came from or I'm going to stomp on you. Oh, man, well, the guy I was talking about looked like you.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, and please don't take this the wrong way. But the moment I saw you, I said, damn, we could be related. We got the same. We got the same.
Wait, you should see when I'm on Sean's show. Everyone says, hey, look at these. You guys looks like two nutsacks, you know, two nuts next to each other. A bunch of shaved balls, the two of you. So.
And the thing was, I had a couple of people that respond to me going, how come you shaved your head? And I said, well, you don't understand. It really wasn't a choice. I had reasonably long hair, but honestly, about 10 years ago, I was getting really stressed from going. I went to 9 board hearings. 9 times I pled from my life before these idiots, that they have the power to make yay or nay, depending on how they feel that day, not based on anything other than that. A lot of guys who get denied at the board, it's not because they haven't done the program. It's not that they haven't stayed out of trouble. It's not that they haven't tried to rehabilitate themselves. It's the board member that day. I'm just not feeling that. Yeah. The hell is that? It's not about what you feel. It's about what you know, whether I'm doing the right thing or not. So, I just had, like I said, the hard time of getting this through, but it's amazing that about 10 years ago, I started getting the bologna slice back here. And the thing was, in prison, though, and my friend, she used to tell me, well, you can shave your head because, men are very respectable out here. It's considered to be just a normal thing. I said, no, in prison, I cannot shave my head because then people think I'm now a skinhead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't really, that's kind of the funny thing. When I first went to prison, the only people with shaved heads were guys who liked to use their heads in fights and didn't want anybody grabbing the hair.
Yeah.
Or a guy who basically lost his hair, but then they usually had the Jean-Luc Picard type.
Yeah.
Okay. So finally, I think it was probably about 2014. It was after I lost my first date from the governor took it, which was ironically Brown, and he's the one that let me keep it the next time. I got trimmers and I trimmed my hair down because I wasn't going to shave it. So I trimmed it down to where maybe I had, half an inch or something. Right. So I was like trying to, and because I started noticing it was getting thinner in other parts too. And because I'm not doing the comb over, I'm not going to have 10 hairs tied here.
No.
I'm not doing that
either.
So, but then as soon as I got home, I got talked into shaving my head. And funny enough, I had the trimmers, but they wouldn't get close enough. I just had this so I actually got razor blades and did, which took me a couple of tries before I learned not to, slice myself open.
Yeah.
Luckily here recently, I just got a Remington head shaver thing that works excellent.
Yeah.
No, so that's not promoting Remington.
This episode is not brought to you by Remington, but it should be between the two of us. If you're listening to this only, then I'll describe Jamie as looking like an older version of me, which is to say a great looking gentleman with a shaved head.
Well, the funny thing is this is the other part. The other thing about prison people don't realize is that it's almost a time capsule. Your maturity level tends to be where you were when you first go in.
Interesting.
If you were 15 and you come out at 65, you're still thinking 15.
Yeah.
And I knew guys in their 50s that were still wanting to wear their ball caps sideways and, roll their pants up and, do that. Yeah. Well, I was 30. Well, I'm 66 now, but I think 30.
Yeah.
And that was a big difference because I saw guys, and there were some who struggled real hard to mature. And I gave them kudos for that because they really could see they wanted to grow up and stuff. But it used to aggravate me when I'd see 50, 55-year-old guys talking about getting out and finding 18-year-old girlfriends. Yeah, I'm going to go hang out at a college and get me an 18-year-old girlfriend. And I go, why? What have you got in common with an 18-year-old girlfriend? Well, I don't want some old broad, but you're an old dude.
Right.
I mean, what would an 18-year-old girl want with you? You don't got no money. I mean, I said, become a millionaire, then okay, then I understand it. But, so that's kind of the thing. So
what a crazy story. And I know that we haven't even gotten into all of it, but we've got to leave it here. But I'm going to encourage people to check out your book. Definitely buy it. Hey, listen, support his work. This is crazy. I mean, this sort of situation is fascinating and horrifying all in the same time, but the fact that you're out, you're speaking at prisons, you're writing books, you're doing all the things that that society would want you to do. So for God's sake, man, give this guy a break and buy his books and support his work and check him out. He's got a YouTube channel, Jamie Morgan Kane. You can see him at Sean Atwood's channel. You guys have done a lot of work together. It's where I first came across you. And anywhere else where people can find you?
Yeah. Go to Jamie. You can go to JamieMorganKane.com, and there's a thing. It's a more of a, build more about my life and pictures and stuff. But there's a lot of, like I said, about hedgehogs and the hobby stuff and things like that. But like I said, but I've done like three videos about my first trip back to the Isle of Man that are that gives people a little more insight of that. I'm hoping to go back. Sean and our schedule to go back the 26th of November for a talk. But of course we don't know how things are going to be by then.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's been great. I enjoyed speaking with you. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry we couldn't link up last week. We've had within the extended family that I'm connected to here, we had a COVID death, and I actually had to represent my friend at the funeral because she's 82 and she couldn't take the chance of that.
Wow.
I rep, and funny enough, that's the first actual funeral that I went to of somebody I've actually ever known.
Wow.
And then we've had a couple other extended family members who've had COVID and it's recovered from it. So it has actually touched home here. But that was kind of the reason that last week got.
Nope. Yeah. And understandable. We were emailing each other and it was like, hey, do your thing. That's a priority. We can record whenever, we can record another time, but you're never going to have a chance with those people. So I appreciate you taking.
And it came up so sudden, it was,
well, thanks for sitting down with me. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening and definitely do support Jamie's work.
Okay.